I have a feeling that we will get a few more people joining us yet. It's only just 7. So we'll probably find a few more coming in. Sometimes it takes longer to get onto Zoom than you expect, and sometimes you're just straight in there. That's the unpredictable nature of technology. But it is really good to see you all once again this evening. I hope that you are managing in this latest set of lockdown circumstances to find ways to stay positive and to stay engaged with what's going on around.
Here comes everyone else.
Pinging back into us again. Welcome back, those who've just joined us from the breakout rooms. Hopefully you can now, you could now see Adrian's screen, but it's gone again.
Oh, he's there.
You muted, Trish.
Quite. I think James must have muted me there.
Yes, I just muted you. You're not on mute. So
that's one way to shut me up. So I'm not quite sure where I got to, but a very warm welcome to you all this evening. Just a quick mention now that this is the penultimate session of this series. We have one more next week, and then we're pausing for a few weeks. We'll have got halfway through the Gospel of Mark, and we'll be just coming up to Advent. So we'll have a little break during that period. But in the new year, we'll begin again and have 6 weeks back to back to look at the second half of Mark. So do pop that in your diary and look forward to that in the new year. For this evening, we're very grateful to Adrian to be with us once again this evening. James and I were wondering what we knew about Mark if Adrian didn't make it this evening that we could share. But I'm very glad to say that Adrian is here again to share with us. James has muted us all, but do unmute and contribute where the opportunities arise this evening. It's so much richer when we hear your contributions to what's there. So please do share when those opportunities arise. I'm going to hand over to Adrian to open our evening in prayer and to give us a sense of direction as to where we're going this evening.
Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this time, this place, online place together where we can share and journey with you and journey in your word. And we just pray that you will open your word to us by your Spirit. Help it take root within us and help us to see how this is our story of discipleship as well. Come and lead us and come and help us to follow. We ask it in your name. Amen.
Amen.
So I'm going to run through really quickly what we've done before and what you know quite well at this point. If I can do it like this. Okay, so Gospel according to Mark. We began this journey. We know that there are two primary keys to understanding any piece of text. The first is context, and second is genre. Context determines the meaning, and genre determines our appropriate response. Gospel is a particular type of writing, a particular genre. It's not just biography, it's not just history, but it's a type of writing that is written to make a point, and everything we need to know is included. All the detail is important, and the key question is always to ask, what does it mean? This is a picture, a map of the first century Near Middle East, and the important points to note really are here is Palestine, there's Judea, Samaria, Galilee, that's the Sea of Galilee, that's the Dead Sea, and that's the Jordan that connects them. the River Jordan that connects them. There's Jerusalem. There's Nazareth and Capernaum. And this is, of course, the Mediterranean Sea here. And in the style of Mark's Gospel, the easiest way to understand the geography is to say that everything within this white area happens in a Jewish context, and everything outside of that, in that yellowy browny area, is happening in a Gentile context. Of course, all of it happens in the context of the Roman Empire, but the white area is predominantly Jewish in culture. Okay, so let's jump right in. And this is where we got to, Mark chapter 4, verse 35, or we got to verse 34 last week. And verse 35 says this: on that day, when evening had come, he, Jesus, said to them, the disciples, let us go across to the other side. On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to them, let us go across to the other side. So what do you make of that? Anyone? Feel free to unmute and tell me, is there anything important in there?
Thought it was to the Roman Empire side of the lake.
Oh, sorry.
Right. So let us go across to the other side. They're clearly moving from the Gentile side of the lake to the from the Jewish side of the lake, rather, to the Gentile side of the lake. And it's the first time in the story that actually they leave this Jewish area, and that's going to prove to be quite an important thing, right? What else?
It could mean going on over to the other side, like meaning joining another group.
Yeah.
You know, if you think of an us and them.
Yeah, very much. Jews and Gentiles was us and them, always was. Yeah, yeah. I just want to pick out those first three words as well, because I think they're important to us. On that day. And I want to just link us back to where we were last week, because that's the day we're talking about, and that's the day Mark is talking about. So can we just remember a little bit of what happened last week?
Jesus was doing some teaching.
Jesus was doing heaps of teaching, and he called together these people who were going to be part of this movement that he was starting, and he taught them things like, not everyone who joins us is going to stick it out. Some people are going to fall away on the journey, be tempted away by other things, but that's okay, because those that remain faithful will produce a harvest out of all proportion that will change the way the world works. When they said to him, Jesus, how does this work? He said to them, you don't have to know how it works. You have to be faithful. Remember that part? And we got to the end of last week, and I said, after asking you a couple of times through the week, I said to you, now, if you had been journeying with Jesus, what would be your next question? And almost every time we got it right. We knew what was the next logical thing to be answering. And we finished last week, and I asked you, what's the next step in the journey? Can you remember? I don't remember who it was, but I do remember what was said. Who can help us?
Go put it into practice.
Go put it into practice, right? So that's what we were expecting. This is a kind of a go put it into practice moment. Okay? So let's go back to that. But let's actually read the story this time. You're really skilled by now at handling gospel text. Going to say the usual things. What does it sound like Mark is saying? Where is the detail? What seems unusual? What do you think the point is? Okay, that sort of thing. This is a stunningly beautiful piece of gospel writing. It really is some of the best example of of gospel writing. So good that Matthew and Luke basically just copied it. They said, we can't do this any better. And basically copied it. John had a little theological worry with it, and he changed a small part of it. But this is good stuff. So let's listen to it and put our best gospel ears on to hear the story. On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to the disciples, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. And a great gale arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. But Jesus was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up, and they said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are dying?" He woke up, rebuked the wind, said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" So what might be happening?
He's trying to show them the significance and importance of faith.
Okay. What else? Bruce?
An unexpected storm.
It's an unexpected storm? Possibly. If I said to you, Jeff, if I said to you it was an expected storm, what would you make of that? What would be expected about this storm as you read the story?
I think Mark's writing at a time when the church is going through a lot of persecution, and he's telling them that don't be afraid, Jesus is with us, he's in this boat with us, and we will ride the storm with him.
I think that's all good, Celia. I still want to unpack about the storm, though. Someone touched on it at the beginning. Was it you, Jenny? Tell us.
I have no idea. I was just going to say that the boat is full of fishermen. You would expect them to be able to handle a storm. So it tells us a little bit about the how dramatic the storm was.
Okay. Yeah. Who said to us right on the beginning? Yeah, right at the beginning when we started talking about the other side of the lake. What did we say about the other side of the lake?
I don't know who said it, but it was said it was Gentile territory.
It's Gentile territory. So what Jesus says when he says to us, it says to these good Jewish men, let us go across to the other side. He's probably saying to them, let's go to a place you've never been before, right? Let's go be with those Gentile people on the other side of the lake. And
there's one other aspect which I think we're overlooking, and that is when you read that very first verse, on that day when evening came, all this is happening in darkness. The fishermen would not have been used to being on the sea at night.
Possibly not. The feeling of evening had come would also be a marker that the day had come to an end, because they didn't think the day ended at midnight. They thought the day ended when the sun set. But quite possibly that. But I want to suggest to you that part of the storm that is blowing up in these disciples' lives is about going to the other side. Now, I wasn't there. I don't know if there was a storm on the lake on that Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening, or whatever it was then, okay? But I'm sure that as we read the story, Mark is wanting us to identify that even that one of the storms that was blowing up that day was a storm in the disciples' lives. Jesus was taking them to an uncomfortable place to do something that they wouldn't have thought of doing, in a way that they wouldn't have imagined of doing. They'd spent their lives looking across that lake with no intention to go and mix with Gentiles or go on a holiday there where they probably keep pigs and eat pork and do weird stuff like that. And so as the disciples cross the lake, it becomes more and more worrying for them. Does that make sense? Can you understand that happening? So
this is like a metaphorical storm in their lives as well. A bit like in a film, whenever a character is at a crisis point, there's always a thunderstorm.
Right.
Filmmakers copy the gospel.
Right. So Sharon, it's part of the gospel kind of writing. And so we want to go into our modern way of thinking and ask the history question. Was it a storm? What kind of a storm? Was there lightning? Whatever. Mark writing, gospel writing, is saying that's not the question. The question is this: what does it mean? It means that as we try to go across to unfamiliar places with Jesus, we might find this storm blowing up in our lives. Does that make sense? Sorry, Anne, cut you off 3 times now.
Was he also testing them because he knew he was absolutely exhausted? He knew he'd probably fall asleep, and he wanted to see how they would react when he wasn't with them, to see if they coped with him not being.
I think you've got some good questions there. I might want to just stick a bit closer to the text, but certainly what happens is, as they cross the lake, and you've got 12 disciples who are getting more and more fretful, and the more they get there, the closer they get to Gentile territory, the more worried they are. This is a bigger problem and a bigger storm. And while all that is happening, there's one guy who's asleep in the back of the boat, unperturbed. This is the most normal, natural thing in the world for people to mix. There's nothing to worry about. He's fallen asleep. He's comfortable, man. There's a cushion there. He's all right. And he's sitting in the back of the boat, which presumably is where the tiller is, okay? So that thing that gives direction, apart from the sail, which gives it force forward, but the thing that actually steers the ship, that's where Jesus is. He's at the back of the boat. And so in a sense, here they are in this boat, heading out on a mission that Jesus has called them to, and he's in the back, completely relaxed about what is happening, giving direction to the project, and they're standing at the front of the boat, looking at the shoreline that's approaching, getting more and more and more fretful. The storm blows up in their lives.
I find it hard to believe he wasn't also frightened, because he'd never been there before. He was a man.
Let's stick with what Mark tells us.
Yeah.
Mark gives no indication that Jesus is worried in the least. He tells us he's in the stern and he's asleep. Jesus is not worried, as Mark presents the story to us.
Could we just say that Jesus is forcing them to face their fears?
I don't see. Well, yes, I suppose he says to them, let us go. So he's making the decision. So I suppose in a sense he is making them face their fears. They're not just a little bit concerned, because verse 38, they're saying, but I'd like it translated into English. They're saying, this is killing us. Okay. Their words are, do you not care that we are perishing? And Jesus wakes up, rebukes the wind, says to the sea, peace, be still. There's peace. The wind ceases. There's a dead calm. Now, if this was only a meteorological storm and wasn't a storm within their lives, the next question is pretty silly. why does Jesus, if they're in this huge storm that is going down and they think the boat's going to sink, Jesus would not be asking first question, why are you afraid? That wouldn't make any sense. They're afraid because they think they're going to drown, there's a storm or whatever. But if Jesus is saying to them, let's go across to the other side of the lake and preach the gospel, then he's saying to them, remember, I'm still with you. And Mark's got this beautiful image in the middle of the story, because here they are and they're sailing across the lake from Jewish territory to Gentile territory. And Jesus is right here in the back of the boat. Okay, there's no one behind him. They're all looking that way. And at some point in the story, they stop looking at their problems and they turn around and they turn back to Jesus. They very intentionally, in Mark's way he's described it, they have to stop looking at the Gentile territory and turn back to Jesus. And when they do that, they find peace. They don't just find peace, they find peace in a boat that is still going from Jewish territory to Gentile territory. They find peace in a boat that is still leading them on a mission to where they don't really think they want to go. But somehow, even there, they find peace. And they say to one another, they are filled with great awe, and they are filled with great awe. And say, who then is this, that even here we can find peace?
Adrian, I go along with your thoughts, but are you completely denying that this did not actually happen as a real storm of the sea? Because it's so pictorially portrayed. Surely there was a storm on the sea as well as them being.
There were storms on the Sea of Galilee on a regular basis. And there's nothing more normal than a storm on the Sea of Galilee. And I mean, 100 times a year, no doubt. I'm not denying there was a storm on the sea at all, okay? What I'm wanting to do is get our minds back into gospel writing and ask, what is the right question? So the right question is not when was the storm, what kind of storm was it, how bad was the storm? The right question is, what does this mean? It means, was it Celia who said to us right at the beginning, that in the storms of life, no matter what they are, if Jesus is in the boat with me and I take my eyes off the problem and turn back to Jesus, I can find peace. So was there a storm? Most likely. Was there a storm in their lives? Almost certainly. Does Mark want you to distinguish between which storm it was? Absolutely not. He's playing with the words and the images here to help you understand what is happening for the disciples. And the disciples, nice, but even more importantly, what is happening for you as a disciple when you find yourself being called by God to go across the lake to a place where you don't really want to go, you've never been before, and you're quite unsure about what it's like. Will you remember to take Jesus in the boat with you? Will you remember to let him steer the project? Will you remember to put your eyes back on him when you're afraid and don't know what's happening? Will you worship in awe when you find yourself on foreign shores saying, wow, even here I can find peace? That makes sense?
Yes, that's what we always preach, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the part that we don't always preach, I think, is the recognition, perhaps, that what is happening is a social project as well. It's not just an exercise in faith. It's also about Jewish people going into Gentile territory and what is happening there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else? There's lots more.
Adrian, there's
Yes.
been a few things in the chat, Adrian.
Yeah.
John and Rachel Sterling said, did Jesus know that there would be a storm? What do we think?
Right. So I imagine that Jesus knows that there's going to be a storm. Yes. I think that if we're talking about a physical weather storm, there's probably a good chance that the disciples and everyone else would know when this is going to happen. Does Jesus know that asking these these Jewish disciples to grow to Gentile territory is going to be a problem? Certainly. Yeah. So on both accounts, I'd say yes, Jesus knows there's a storm coming. There's a question from Sharon and John. So let me read it. Where does the Old Testament text from Psalms about God who rides on the storms come into this? And when do the disciples make the connection, or do they make the connection? I don't think I've ever associated the stern with the tiller and rudder and steerage, though I know it. That is where Jesus is at the steerage point. I like the looking one way and turning back. Thanks, Sharon. I think what is important about the Old Testament texts is it's part of the same conversation that Mark is using. So there's a lot of Old Testament image. In fact, Mark is the first person who calls Galilee the Lake of Galilee, and it is a lake. He's the first person who calls it a sea. Why does he call it the sea? Because there's all this old biblical image of sea being a place of turmoil, of sea being a place of evil. The Jewish people were not seafaring people. It was always suspicion. It was always filled with monsters, that sort of thing. And so there's this unnatural thing about the sea for them. And that's why he refers to it as the Sea of Galilee. I mean, it's almost as if the disciples and Jesus head out on this project and the whole of nature is trying to prevent them. It's trying to stop them getting to the other side. Okay. Let's go on.
Can hear me not actually.
So there's the map. There's the Sea of Galilee. They're coming from somewhere about, let's say, as a guess, somewhere about there to somewhere about there. Okay. And when they get out the boat and they land on the shore, they're going to be there. There is Gadara, and there is Gerasa. And this whole area, sort of like that, is called the Decapolis, the city of the 10 Greek cities. Okay, but the key ones we need to notice are Gadara and Gerasa. And the key thing to notice is that they're not actually on the border right where the Sea of Galilee is. Okay. The Decapolis was probably the eastern frontier of the Roman Empire. And because it was kind of the boundary, one of the boundary areas of the Roman Empire, it was kind of one of those places where the empire sort of began to be a little less strongly held by Rome. And this loose confederation of territories at some point decided that they didn't want to pay Roman taxes anymore. And they rose up against the Romans. They drowned the puppet government, the Herodians, and the Romans said, we're not going to settle for this. And they sent their forces to retaliate. And Jewish historian Josephus tells us this story. He says, Vespasian, Caesar, sent Lucius Annius to Gerasa with a cavalry and a considerable number of foot soldiers. And after taking the town by assault, he killed 1,000 young men who had not escaped. He took their families captive and allowed his soldiers to plunder the property. Finally, he set fire to the houses and marched against the surrounding villages. Those who were able-bodied fled, the weak perished, and all that was left went up in flames. And so the war spread throughout the mountain and plain country of the Decapolis. I was supposed to read you the story. That was just the background. So listen, and just listen for the parts that stand out or sound unusual, or try to place yourself in the story and hear what Mark is saying. They came to the other side of the lake, to the region of the Gerasenes. And when he'd stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs. No one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he'd often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he'd said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there on the hillside, a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us into them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned in the lake. The swine herds ran off and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. And as he was getting in the boat, the man who'd been possessed by demons begged him that he might go with him. But Jesus refused and said, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." He went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the lake. Now, there's a lot there, and there's much that we could talk about, and there's much that we will talk about, but I want to talk about the text, okay? I want to talk about what Mark has put there. Okay, so I don't see anything in there about mental illness. Okay, I want to know what is the imagery that he's bringing to mind. What does this mean for my understanding of God, of what it might mean to be a disciple, of what God is doing in the world? Is that a fair question? Perhaps a starting point might be to ask, as we read this story, do we hear echoes from anywhere else? Has Jesus driven out demons before?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
okay. Oh, we've had that before. All right.
Are the words similar to what happened in the synagogue at Capernaum?
They certainly are.
Recognizing and then sort of pleading for help, in a sense.
Yeah. And in first part of verse 7, it's very similar, where he talks about the Son of the Most High God, and he says, have you come to destroy us? Or here he says, what have you come to do to us? So it's definitely an echo of that story in this story. Yeah.
Are these therefore evil spirits, or are we saying he was mad? I mean, I would say he had an evil spirit with him, that's all. And in the story, the spirit's going to the swine, and the swine going to the lake. How is it to go around about just mental illness, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think Mark wants to take us a step above that and to look at the story, can I say, from a little bit higher up. The first bit of a clue of what he gives us is he says, this happened in the region of Gerasa. Now, yeah. I showed you a map to start off with, which wasn't meant to mislead you. But sometimes when we talk about a place, we might mention a bit of geography, but it's not actually about the geography. It's about the history or about what happened there. If I was to give you a list and say to you, West Ham, Arsenal, Tottenham, Chelsea, what does it sound like? What are you going to talk about?
Football teams.
Football teams, absolutely. It could actually be suburbs of London, though. If I was to talk about Holyrood, Sandringham, Balmoral, Hillsborough, Windsor, what are we talking about?
Royal palaces, yeah.
We're talking about the royal family and royal palaces, but actually, again, it's just geography. Ypres, the Somme, Vimy Ridge, Passchendaele. Those aren't just places in Europe. Those are First World War battles, key battle sites of the First World War. So when Mark talks about the Gerasenes, he's not just talking about a geographical place. He wants us to start the story by remembering that these people tried to throw off the oppression of the Roman Empire and were absolutely hammered into the ground in return. They had now come to this place where they were living among tombs. There was a man there who was among the tombs, and he lived among the tombs, and you know what? No one could restrain him. He had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but nothing had been able to subdue him. And night and day, among the bodies, among the tombs, he's howling and even hurting himself. Okay, this is not just a picture of one guy, some guy living in the tombs. This is a picture of that whole community and the way that community has been oppressed and destroyed. Can you catch a glimpse of the picture? And even at this point, when Jesus comes on the scene, the first reaction of that community isn't to embrace Jesus and say, this is wonderful. It's rather this cautious thing that kind of says, you know what, last time we threw off the Romans, it was bad news for us. Have you come to make more trouble for us? And when the exorcism is complete, at the end of the story, let me just find the verse numbers here. They're saying strange things. In the story, like they come to Jesus and they see that the exorcism is complete, the healing is fine, the demoniac is sitting there, verse 15, clothed and in his right mind. Make no mistake, the verse goes on, the very same man who had the legion is now clothed and healed and in his right mind. And the next four words are, and they were afraid. That's the wrong response, isn't it? Surely if someone is healed in our presence and this exorcism has happened and everything is, this person's restored to life, our response would not be to be afraid, unless there's a threat of reprisals or something that's happening in the background. Ian?
I thought they wanted Jesus to go because he had almost got rid of 2,000 swine, which would be quite a valuable commodity, I would have thought.
The story is often spoken of in that term, but there's a lot in the Greek that is painting this picture of Roman power and Roman military. So the guy's name is Legion. Okay, Legion is nobody baptized as their child Legion. Legion is a military term for 2,000 soldiers, or I think 2,000 Roman soldiers. If I can just pick out some of the other words, the word in verse 7 is torture, which sadly might also be a military word, much as it shouldn't. The term that he's translated, that is swine, that image of swine. Often new recruits to the Roman army were called swine, and actually within their religious sort of practices, there was a swine cult as well. When they go down the hill into the water, is that verse 13? They rushed down the steep bank into the lake. Again, that word rushed in the Greek is very much a military word of, if you imagine sort of a military charge, that sort of thing. And then they drown, which is sort of struggling and wheezing and that sort of thing. But also a memory of how the people of the Gerasenes had dealt with the Roman officers and that sort of thing. So in the back of the story is a lot of language that is saying to us, this is about this Roman occupation and the battle that these people had with the Roman occupation. So it's not primarily, the key thing coming out of the story is not primarily, oh, but we lost 2,000 swine. I think the key reflection would be that they're worried about what happens if the Romans come back, possibly. You were going to say something? Yeah?
Could we say that the early Christians would have understood all this history at the time, as per the Roman, obviously, attack on that particular area of the world? They would understand all this that we don't understand because we don't really know the history these days of that area. Right. Is that true?
That's exactly right. So Mark hasn't had to retell the history because he's assumed that people in the community would know the history. Maybe not everyone, but enough people to know it. So all Mark has had to say is, in the region of the Gerasenes.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it would bring that whole image to mind. Right. On the battlefields of the Somme, you know, and it brings all of that to mind, all the trenches and all of that.
Your point about the swine, the two things match up. That the only reason for keeping 2,000 swine would be to feed the Roman army. There would be someone either selling them to the army. So it's servicing the army, so it's got that connotation as well.
Yeah, I think that sounds perfectly fair. Yeah, thank you, Alan. Yeah. Anything else there? Let me just go on. Okay.
See, Adrian, Helen made the point. She said, as soon as they reach the other side, the place they were afraid of, they meet a man of whom they might well have been afraid because of the demons, and yet the demons declare who Jesus is. They know his authority. They leave the man and enter the unclean Gentile pigs. The expected storm continues for the disciples, and yet there's a calm and peace in the man. That's from Helen.
Mm. Yeah, right. Except that perhaps Helen, the storm for the disciples actually ended on the lake. Didn't continue all the way. They found peace in their journey before they actually got to the other side. And Sharon's brought up and spoken about Antiochus Epiphanes slaughtering a pig in the temple and desecrating it. Of course, pigs were big things when you wanted to get at the Jews, weren't they? This was an unclean animal. This was part of how Mark identifies that this is Jewish territory. You wouldn't have found 2,000 pigs on the other side of the lake, that's for sure. Verse 17, just the same image. They beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood, which is contrary to what you might have expected if it had been such a positive experience for them. We have a difficulty in modern thought of getting our minds around whether this is one person or whether this is a community. And we've constantly got to place ourselves within the genre of gospel and understand it in that sense. Can we move on?
Yeah.
I want to share with you what I think is one of my favorite stories in the Gospels. And we're going to have to move through it quite quickly. So it's going to sound like two stories when I read it to you, but I'm giving you a big clue and telling you this is not two stories. This is one story. And after I've read it, I'm going to ask James to just magic us into groups for about 3 minutes. And when I come back, I want you to tell me everything you can know from the story, from what Mark has written, from that, everything you can know about the two ladies in the story, about the lady and the girl in the story. Okay? Let's listen. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, we're back on Jewish territory. A great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the lake. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged Jesus repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So Jesus went with Jairus, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be made well." And immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately, aware that the power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." And while he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people wailing and weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talita cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. He left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. So you're going to get an invitation to go into a small group, and your question in the small group is this, just as briefly as you can, from the text, from what Mark tells us, what can you know about the little girl? And question 2, what can you know about the lady? Okay? You're going to get 2 minutes, and then you'll get a 2-minute warning, and bang, we'll all be back together in 4 minutes. All right?
Breakout rooms are open now, guys.
Thanks, James.
What was the question again, Adrian? What?
From the text, what do we know about the woman and the girl?
What do we know about the woman and the girl? Okay, that's gone.
Cool. Thank you.
Have you seen the movie, the animation movie?
Which one?
Oh, it's called The Miracle Maker. Have you seen The Miracle Maker? Oh, it's Ralph Fiennes plays Jesus. So it's like stop motion animation.
Okay.
And it's called The Miracle Maker, and it's built around this. This is like this girl is like one of the.
So I'm still trying to get my mind around Ralph Fiennes as Jesus. It's Ralph Fiennes who I think he is. He who must not be named. Is that not Ralph Fiennes from Harry Potter?
Yes, he is. It is. Yes. Yes. It's this is before his Harry Potter days. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
It's
carry
the
on.
very same. Yeah. Yeah. So it's you hear Ralph Fiennes' voice, but it's like clay modelling. It's very good. Yeah. 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 And so the story is told through the eyes of this girl. So she starts off the story, and then she's poorly, and Jesus heals her, and then like.
Oh, of this girl in the story. Oh,
and then she follows him as he goes to Jerusalem. So yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Were you saying the other day that Herod wasn't Jewish? Did I mishear that? Or
Was Herod Jewish? I think Herod had, I don't know on which side of the line he actually fell, but he certainly had this very complicated relationship both with Rome and with the Jews. And he was constantly trying to walk this fine line. He'd been given the short straw in terms of thank you. In terms of areas of the Roman Empire to be in charge of, because the one that was notoriously difficult was the Jews. And so he did things for the Jews, like built the temple and things like that to try and get them on the right side. But at the same time, his life and lifestyle and his way of being was just so contrary to Judaism and to their values. I don't think he was Jewish. No.
So he wasn't.
He did try to appease them all over the place. Yeah.
All right. So he wasn't native to Palestine then, or he would have been put there by the Romans.
Tough questions. No, I don't know. He certainly he was Herod because Rome had appointed him. Whether they brought him from somewhere else or whether they appointed a local, I'm actually not sure. It was Herod, and then what? And then when he moved on, passed away, got rid of, the area that he ruled over was divided 4 ways and ruled by his 4 follow-on sons. And I suspect, if I remember correctly, oh gosh, especially if this is being broadcast on YouTube, that he was that this Herod is one of those 4 sons. Not Herod the Great.
Like,
but
just
Herod,
shut the rooms now, yeah?
Yep, thank you. They close themselves.
60 seconds. I've sent a 2-minute message a minute ago.
Okay.
Now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure, you ask tough questions. I've never asked such tough questions.
Well, I like the way that, I always saw the contrast between Herod, who's like this pretend puppet king. I guess this is like later on in the gospel, and then you've got to contrast with Christ, who is the true king, and like there's this kind of man-made paper mache king, and then you've got the real deal.
And I mean, the chapter down the line in Mark's gospel, I mean, there's this whole story of totally discredits Herod, and just shows him up for who he is, and eventually that he's the one who has John the Baptist beheaded. But here he is partying and living the good life with the rulers and the military and the big businessmen. Yeah. Welcome back, everyone. Jump right in and tell me, what do we know about the lady?
She's absolutely desperate.
Absolutely desperate,
This
yeah?
has been going on 12 years and cost her all her money.
Cost her all that money. Her health has got worse and worse. She's absolutely desperate. What else?
But she's the first person to be healed by touching the cloak rather than speaking to Jesus directly. And
yeah,
okay. Said that if Jesus hadn't known that she'd touched the cloak, she'd have got away with it. She'd have walked away, presumably healed, and it wouldn't even be in the story.
Yeah, she took the initiative.
And she took some initiative, yeah. The cloak is a whole Old Testament story that Mark has planted in here that I'm not going to talk about tonight. But interesting, yeah. What else do we know about her?
She was menopausal.
We don't know that.
She was very weak, very poor, and she would have been a complete outcast.
Okay. She was an outcast because she was unclean. So she shouldn't have been in the crowd because anyone she touched would have been unclean as well. Yeah. She was
very strong faith.
It looks like she has a strong faith. Yeah. What do someone said she was poor, which is true, and we can conclude that. Why?
She spent all her money on quack.
Oh yes, that too. Yeah, less obvious reason than that as well. In that she would not be speaking on her own in public to another man if she was married. She doesn't have a man to speak on her behalf. So most likely she's a widow. It's more likely she's a widow than than that she's never been married. And by being a widow, we can assume that she's poor. Yeah. What's her name?
Might she have been divorced because of her hemorrhaging, and her husband didn't want anything to do with her?
It's possible. We don't know. We don't know.
She'd taken a problem to all sorts of Orthodox people. You know, it mentions physicians, so she's been trying to find a solution in different places for many years. Jesus is almost a last resort.
What's her name?
We don't know her name.
She hasn't got a name, has she?
No, but we know that touching Jesus totally changed her.
Okay, yeah. We know also that as she touched Jesus, she was healed. And Mark makes a point not of telling us she was healed. He tells us the bleeding stopped immediately, and then he tells us she was healed. So if you miss the one, get the other one. He doesn't want you to miss it. She was healed, okay? She doesn't have a man to speak for her. She doesn't then, in a sense, belong to anyone. We might not like the language, but the language of the day. But come the end of the story, she's described by Jesus as a daughter of Abraham. She's gone from someone who wasn't a part of society to someone who's in the middle of society. Yeah? I think that's a pretty good summary. Tell me about the little girl.
She's also a daughter. She is a daughter already. And the fact that we've got two daughters, one who's been called a daughter for the first time, and the daughter of a very rich man, there's a link in the Father God who has daughters.
All right. So she's sticking with the little girl. She's the daughter of a prominent man in society, presumably rich, but certainly prominent and powerful. She's got someone to speak for her. She doesn't have to come and touch any cloak. He comes and says, Jesus, come with me. We need to heal my daughter. She's probably grown up hugely privileged from a wealthy family. She has everything she needs. Those are all fair assumptions from the story, as Mark tells us.
And
she's like, sorry?
She still has no name.
She doesn't have a name. Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She doesn't have a name, and she's lying on the bed, assumed to be dead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What else do we know about her?
Somebody in our group pointed out that the woman had been bleeding for 12 years and the daughter was 12 years old, which is an amazing coincidence, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's gospel writing. So here is this daughter of Abraham who's been bleeding for 12 years. 12, why 12? What does 12 say to us?
12 tribes.
12 tribes, Judith, right. So in a sense, she's perhaps representative of the nation of Israel. Okay? This poor lady who doesn't really belong, who Jesus heals, is representative of Israel. There's also in the story another 12, this almost dead girl of wealth and privilege who has her father running around to sort out her life and has the servants chased out the house when Jesus arrives and all that sort of thing. Probably got a pony for Christmas, I don't know. And but also representative of Israel. And so we have these two representatives of part of society. Stick with me, okay? Both Israel. Part of Israel is really in bad shape, and everyone knows it. It's bleeding to death. No one wants anything to do with it. And on the other side, there's a part of Israel that everyone thinks is going swimmingly well, has everything it needs, and yet in truth is as good as dead. And my sermon, it would have been Mark's, he didn't think of it. But if he'd wanted to tell you all of this in one sentence, this is what he would have said. The rich will not find life until the poor stop bleeding. The rich won't find life until the poor stop bleeding. Jesus is on his way to go and heal this little girl, when actually he stops with this wholly inappropriate request from this highly inappropriate woman to bring her healing. And when they get to the house, everyone thinks there's no life here. But you know what? He took her by the hand and he said to her, get up. And she got up, and there is life. And everyone is overcome with amazement. And in just the same way as Mark told you twice that this lady stopped bleeding and she's alive, so he says to you, she got up, she walked about, he told them to give her something to eat. Is there any doubt that she's alive? There's no doubt that she's alive. But she might need sustenance or teaching or something to help her live in a new way. Jesus says, give her something to eat. It's a powerful little story, isn't it?
Yep.
Anything else there you want to talk about?
She was just a typical teenager at 12.
Yeah, doesn't really say. The only thing Mark tells us about her is that she's privileged, probably wealthy family, privileged, assumed to have everything that she'd want and need, and they think she's dead. There's no life here. She's got everything you think society tells you want, and in the midst of it, you find, even with all this stuff, there's no life. This isn't life.
What's the significance of the Aramaic phrase in this passage?
I don't know.
All right, okay.
Sorry, Adrian.
Is there something in this passage about Jairus, the synagogue leader, did have faith in Jesus? We often dismiss all the Jewish leaders as being anti-Jesus, but they weren't.
Yeah, and it's unusual for a character in the gospel to have a name, actually, for someone outside of the disciples and Jesus are generally unnamed. So there is a tradition that suggests that this refers to, or is like a tribute to a specific Jairus who helped build up a synagogue or something like that. I don't have a fixed answer for you.
The little girl could have been ill for 12 years, couldn't she? And the Jairus could have spent all his money trying to revive her.
Doesn't say that, though.
No, it doesn't say what it doesn't say that at all. But I was thinking, never thought about it before. I thought she could have been lying there and 12 years old, and she just had never lived. Yeah. Anyway,
I think I mean, never lived is quite a nice side of expression to get into the story, but I'll stick with Mark's words. Whether she had lived or not, she's dead. You know, in a sense, everyone around her perceives her as being dead. Adrian, I did see your hand up twice.
Yes, in both cases, there's absolute certainty. The one with the hemorrhages, she says, if I touch his clothes, I shall be made well. She doesn't say, I might be made well. She says, I shall be. And with Jairus' daughter, Jairus says, put your hands on her and she will live. There's no might about it. In both cases, they're totally certain that the cure will be there.
Yeah. Anything else?
Do you think Mark constructed this from happenings that had happened, but he put it into this juxtaposition because he wanted to make the points about that you brought out?
I think that gospel writing, gospel as a genre, is a mix of all kinds of things. It's tradition, it's history, it's stories, it's impressions, it's all of those things that are put together. It's quite possible that Mark, Mark used the stories or traditions that were available to him that might have included real accounts. There's no reason to think that none of the accounts are real. Of course, there's real to them. Of course, there's history behind them and that sort of thing. But the key question, even in looking at what we've just read, the key question to ask is not the history question, not the science question, not how did he heal her, not what exactly was wrong with this woman. Was it an iron deficiency, or that's not the question. The question is, what does it mean for us? What does it mean about Jesus? What does it mean about God? What does it mean about us as disciples, and what it's going to mean to follow Jesus? So if I was answering that question about this passage, I would say some of what comes out for us as disciples is a priority for the poor and in uplifting the poor, while at the same time acknowledging that the rich are not dead. They just need to be raised to a new way of living.
But in saying that sentence, you are making the connection as well back to the prophets. And the whole gospel began with Malachi and Isaiah. And so this story then falls in line with the prophetic message of Amos and Micah crying out, you've got to sort society out and deal with the poor in order that, as you say, the rich will live.
Absolutely. No surprises there, Sharon. I mean, Mark goes out of his way to tell us, to teach us that the story of Jesus is a continuation. It's perfectly consistent with the stories of the prophets and stories of the Old Testament. Only reason he didn't call it scripture. He just said it's consistent with scripture. Now we've later called it scripture. But in effect, that's it. Jesus continues the work of the prophets, calling society to account and saying there's a right way to live.
But can we only say that because we associate ourselves with the affluent society as being in the rich, and we take it as a warning?
I think I think you do well if you do associate yourself with the story, in the story with the rich, because there's very few people if your household income is above about £500 a month, you are in the top 10% in the world.
Mm.
If your household income is above £500 a month, and of course you get free medical on top of that, but we are the rich in a global context. And you know what, we can't continue to devour the world's resources at the rate that we do and think that we're not killing the poor, or sorry, Mark's words, bleeding the poor to death. We are. And as reasonable disciples trying to follow Jesus, there's something we've got to do.
Is there a further thought here about the social aspect? It could be assumed that in his position, Jairus was prejudiced about Jesus, but when he was desperate, he had to put that prejudice to one side. And it was only because he did that he had the blessing of his daughter's restoration.
Possibly. I'm not going to say no. I mean, Mark doesn't make a big point of wrestling with where Jairus has come from, but he does make a point, which I suppose is what you're saying, that he comes to Jesus completely humbly and gives Jesus all the credit. He got a chair right at the beginning. I've lost it for the moment. But he comes, he kneels before Jesus, he talks to Jesus in a way that
earnestly.
Yeah.
Begged him earnestly.
Begged him earnestly. Doesn't it say that he kneeled before him? I really should be able to find this. It's right in front of me.
It's
Oh, there it
22,
is.
verse
Okay.
22.
Verse
He
22.
threw himself down at his feet, didn't he? And I think
Yeah. He's really humbled himself and put himself before Jesus. He hasn't come to him and said, oh, well, I'm Jairus, you need to come and help me. He hasn't come and said, I'm the leader of the synagogue. He's just come to him, I mean, it seems like at the end of his tether, which is, I suppose, what you're saying. And just said, you're my only hope. Yeah?
he could have been in danger of being in trouble with the people in the synagogue for being so humble in that respect.
Yeah. Possibly. Mark doesn't make anything of it.
Who is this Jesus? He's kind of a young prophet that's kind of not been, he's not got a sound history, has he?
Well, he's got a history of causing trouble, hasn't he?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
But he does have quite a following. The crowds are really with him, and the people are really with him. Yeah.
I think it's fascinating about the power, because he knows the power's gone out of him, and he just thinks to himself, hang on a minute, I know that some of the power's been diverted. And this goes right away through to the crucifixion, when he lays his power aside because he knew that power was with him. He gave that back to his Father. And then he has the power of God has the power of the resurrection. And it comes back to the Lord's Prayer. Thine is thy kingdom, the power and the glory. And if this story illustrates something, it illustrates that power. The power over decay, to stop decay, and the power over something that is death.
Right. And there's no doubt this is a story. I mean, the power aspect of the story is real. What I can see, it's 8:15. Part of our question would be to ask about that passage, that section. What does it say to us that the power went out of Jesus? Yeah, I mean, if I'm asking what does it mean, question around those 3 or 4 words.
Is it Spirit? Is it the Holy Spirit?
No, I don't think so. I think it just paints a picture that this healing costs Jesus something.
Yes.
It doesn't just happen.
Yeah.
It's not just whatever sort of thing. Actually, there's a little image there of it costing Jesus something. Something went out of him into her. And you know what? If we're going to follow Jesus, don't worry, he'll tell us as we get into the story. But if we're going to follow Jesus, it's going to cost us something. You mustn't be surprised by that. I do want to, yeah. I do want to wrap it up, Anne, and just say, if we're okay, just to close and just make the few notices, and I'm quite happy to stay online a little bit longer if you've got an odd question or that sort of thing. Is that okay? Just so that we can honor what we've said about 1:15. Tricia, are there any notices we need to make?
I don't think so. I think we made them at the beginning, but
okay.
Next week will be the last of this autumn series, so do come back. We have the Friday morning a coffee and conversation with Adrian in the morning, so do bring your questions about this wonderful passage along in the morning at 10 o'clock. We've sent the link out for that, but if you need it, let us know.
Okay. All right, super. Let me then, I'm going to put that link back in the chat for us now, but let me close with a word of prayer, and then if you want to hang around and ask a few extra questions, then I'm okay with that. Is that all right?
Sure.
Gracious God, we thank you for your word and for the connection it makes with our lives and with our world. And we thank you that you journey alongside us and challenge us and call us and walk with us and raise us to life. Raise us to life and feed us that we might learn to live in a new way. Amen.
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 Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Go well.
Thank you
for the
indeed.
Conversation and the
Bye-bye.
sharing and all of that this evening. It's been really good. So thank you.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm now going to read Matthew and Luke's account.
That was Ian.
Thank you, Margaret. Bye now.
Yeah, and you've got the original.
Yeah, I know it is. I know Matthew and Luke basically copy. I wonder if it's copied exactly the same. I'm interested. I will read it tonight.
They didn't make, I'll tell you this, they didn't make any mistakes in their copying. So
Right.
where it's different, they've done it intentionally, and you ask the same question. What does it mean? Why has he changed that? What's he trying to say?
Yeah.
Someone was just about to ask me a question, and I think she's left. Has she?
Yeah, she's gone.
I think it was Anne. I can't see.
Oh, sorry about that.
Tricia, are you sending the link out for tomorrow morning?
The link for tomorrow morning was on the email I sent about tonight. It's also
right,
in the
good.
chat. But if you can't see it when you've closed down, drop me an email. I'll send it to you again.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Go well.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks, Adrian, for tonight, especially. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. God bless.
Bye. Thank you.
Cheers, Mark.